AuDHD. What is it? In 2013, the DSM-5 was updated to allow for a dual diagnosis of autism and ADHD. And prior to that, that hadn't been the case. I was working at the time with the National Autistic Society and meeting even then a great number of families whose children had met the autism diagnosis criteria. So they were presenting with many social differences, with sensory processing differences, with repetitive behaviours and interests, and met that criteria absolutely. But also, coupled it with that, they also were demonstrating behaviours of hyperactivity and impulsivity, and some of the autism-friendly, or what were recognised then as kind of autism-friendly strategies and ways of working were really not cutting it, and families were really struggling with the differences in how their child was compared to perhaps an autistic child that they knew from a support group. And so they were really in a dilemma as to what was going on. So it's not surprising that now we've evolved enough to understand, and research is showing us that actually we can give a label, but we can't make a child fit it, and rightly so. It's back to that kind of square peg, round hole scenario. So what we do need to do is flex our thinking, flex the way that we understand the presentations and profiles of the children that we're working with and living with and loving. And so AuDHD has become a much more commonly noted term, and I think social media now is using that term as well. But actually, autism and ADHD diagnosed together, and that profile, that experience for our children is not new. It has been around a long time. And of course, sometimes the way in which that profile manifests is that we have children that are absolutely wreaking havoc, and parents are pulling their hair out and wondering what's going on. And there might be that real impulsive, rash behaviour, and it's forgotten within a minute, and parents are left wondering what happened and ruminating and anxious about it. And of course, that's when we're seeing that dichotomy of an autism presentation. So it might be then that our children are spending a lot of time ruminating and worrying and wishing they hadn't acted on impulse or behaved in that way. So I think with our AuDHD children, in my experience, what I see is a lot more anxiety, a lot more kind of low self-esteem and self-worrying about their behaviours and about the way in which they are processing and interacting and coping with the world. And I've found that having a bit more structure in ordinary situations has been really helpful for this dual diagnosis. So thinking in terms of like Christmas time, when everything's different, and even a toy cupboard that's normally there all the time, and you open the door and you see all those boxes piled up, but actually for many of our AuDHD children, because of the detailed way in which they are processing and the speed in which they're processing, that can merge into one, and they find making a selection a real challenge and can't decide what to do. So just run off and do something else instead, but perhaps something that's not as acceptable or as comfortable for that particular situation. So I've found that actually putting in some very detailed structure with a lot of choice and a lot of self-management over that can be really helpful for some of our children that have that dual diagnosis. And I've found even just marking what's available inside the house, what's available outside the house, and then just giving a nice wipe clean pen so our children can tick that off and they can make choices. So they're taking control over their environment and making choices around what they do and don't want to do. But at the same time, there's some structure there to help them with that focus and to help them not end up in situations where they are ruminating and anxious about the disruption or the disturbance that they're sometimes very mindful of what's happened around them. So trying to make that environment as comfortable, as accessible, and avoid those situations where that anxiety and low self-esteem has got an opportunity to root itself. So I hope there's just something there that you can perhaps have a think about for your child that's got those that dual diagnosis. And it's worth just noting before I finish that actually often ADHD is the diagnosis that comes first. And that's because sometimes those behaviours are the ones that we notice more readily. And then often the research tells us that it's a little bit later on that our children then pick up an autism diagnosis. So it can be that autism diagnosis is coming sort of post 7, 8, 9, 10 and later. But always worth just being mindful of the fact that those two conditions, those two diagnosable profiles can and do very often run in parallel.